video, we're going to be talking about crafting your beginnings, the choices, and the endings of your interactive stories. While a lot of the information in this video is going to be related to choose your adventure formatted stories, which have branching narratives depending on the choices that your participants make, a lot of the information in this video also pertains to writing for location and writing for interactive projects. So they work just as well if you were going to be doing a linear puzzle trail or maybe a historic tale or a poetry trail or even historical self-guided walks. So let's get to it. When you are writing a story for location, in the beginning of your story, it is very important that you have these several elements. So essentially, first, you want to describe the ordinary world and location. Set the normal mood. So the idea is that you want to describe the ordinary world that people are in so that you build that initial trust with the audience member before turning things on their heads and introducing the fantasy into the mix. So after describing the ordinary world, you want to introduce the potential scenario. Are you a private detective? Are you the captain of a spaceship? Are you the historic archaeologist who is researching a set of ruins? So you want to make sure you make that scenario and that introduction quick and sharp, because the third thing that you're going to move into is changing the mood and giving a scene or a paragraph that signifies the introduction of some sort of fiction or task. And then from there, you want to introduce some sort of point of no return. So an event that occurs to push the participant into action and into the first motivational based choices that they have to make. So when you are describing that point of no return and that change in mood that introduces the fictional element into things, you want to make sure that you're also noting the character reactions and speculation. Basically, kind of give you a reason that helps people notice that this is not part of the ordinary and this is the introduction of the story element. Finally, at the end, you want to give choices that are equally weighed. There is nothing worse as a participant in one of these adventures being dared down a particular path and not actually being given a choice. So you want to make sure that your two choices have a weight to them that makes it difficult to make that decision, kind of like real life in a way. So not only do you need to describe the choices, but you should also give a quick description of how a person should get there. Because as we mentioned, sometimes the internal GPS on a phone can be out of whack, and particularly if you're in a city with skyscrapers which block satellites and interfering Wi-Fi signals, some people might find themselves 3 streets over and not realize that they're in the wrong place. So providing that short physical description of exactly how they can walk from where they are to where they choose to be is also very important to incorporate within the choices themselves. Next, I want to talk about the considerations that you need in the different sections of writing this choose your adventure or any type of story in location. So if you are making an immersive project where you want the audience to interact and take part in the narrative, you need to make sure that you're neutral in terms of gender, age, or race. You can, if you like, assign people a character, but you do have to realize that some people may not be as comfortable and immersed if they are standing in the shoes of someone who isn't them. So in saying that, it is a good way to get people standing in someone else's shoes as a minority, or if you're trying to get them to feel what someone else in a particular cause may feel, it is a really great way to get people empathizing with people who are not themselves by putting them in their shoes. But do be aware of the limitations, because if you are making people male and white and heterosexual, and you are a black African American woman who is in love with her best friend from high school, and it's one of those things where if you don't have the neutrality there, people may be less likely to do your story. And so you essentially limit the demographic of people who might be interested in taking on your adventure. So at Story City and in the projects that we do, we always try to aim for neutrality unless it is trying to get people to see a specific example. The next thing I recommend is to not introduce too much backstory. So if you are an audience member who is an only child and doesn't have a brother, and that is what your character has in the story, then that kind of breaks the believability for that person. So for this reason, friends or people that you might look up to in your life, like a teacher, are actually better companions for an immersive style experience. Next thing that we see a lot here in Story City is problems with time travel. We get pitched a lot of time travel stories, particularly when councils are wanting to integrate historical facts into the fictional story. See, time travel tales when you're standing in the real world location is very difficult because things are very clearly different. So if you want to set your story in a post-apocalyptic version of the city that you're in, but a participant is walking the streets seeing a perfectly intact city, this breaks that imagined world or believability. So if you have people traveling back in time in your story, you have to show how the audience member got there. And there must be some sort of remnants of the olden days or something that looks super futuristic to signify the future in that location. Otherwise, the story doesn't work. Locative storytelling isn't like a book or a movie where essentially you are watching somebody else in it. In a locative literature story, you are in the story. You are a character. And so if your surroundings do not match what you are being told is going on, then it honestly doesn't work. And that's one of the quirks of this particular format, unfortunately. Doesn't mean that I am willing to be proven wrong by people who are much cleverer than I am, but it is something that you should consider if you are even thinking about incorporating time travel into a story. Then there are particular themes or storylines that might be problematic if a person who is stepping into the story can be anyone. So, for example, a love story might mean that you end up with an unintentional queer love story, which wasn't your intention. There is obviously nothing wrong with that, but as I said, you need to be aware of the fact that anybody can be stepping into your story, and that changes the story as a result. That's something that I actually really love about these narratives, is that these stories take on different nuances depending on who the person is that steps into this role. And that's what I love so much about these interactive location-based stories. You might also get a problem where maybe like a child audience shows up to your story which is quite gristly in its details on, say, a war story. So you need to also make sure that you are providing the appropriate suggestions for who this story is suited for, whether it's G, PG, M15+, those kind of things. Other considerations you might want to make is how can you incorporate the histories of the place that you're standing in your story to give it an extra layer for your participants. Another thing also to remember is that people's attention span in this kind of media is really short. They're not at home relaxing, watching that movie or reading that book. They are physically standing in that spot, and they are only going to pay attention for a certain amount of time before they get a little bit antsy. So what we found from our experimentation is around about 500 to 700 words max in each location for each section of a choose your own adventure, which makes your audios between 3 to 4 minutes. Obviously, that would be different for, say, a historical walking tour where people might be willing to stand in a particular location for anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. So just know your audience, know your genre, and play around with those different elements. But so far what we've determined is that generally 3 to 4 minute audios are great, and that's around about 700 words for the section. Finally, if the tech breaks, you need to make sure that you give directions to your next location, as we said on the other slide. Otherwise, if you find that a person's GPS is putting them in the wrong spot, or maybe potentially someone is visually impaired, they're going to have a much harder time of finishing their experience if you don't put in directions to where they should go to next. Now we get to end our story, or our video I should say, on the topic of writing endings. So this applies mainly for the choose your own adventure, branching narrative type projects. So if you are giving your reader a choice, then the choice actually has to matter. There is nothing worse than, as a reader or a participant, going through a choose your own adventure, getting to the end and being like, oh, I wonder what would have happened if I had gone back and done it again. And then you go back and realize your choice literally did not matter at all, because essentially you were doing the same story just in different spots. And that's not how you want to leave your participant. These real life choose your adventures don't break that trust between the participant and yourself. Make sure that you are creating interesting and different branches throughout your story so that there really is a choice. It really is mirroring that unpredictability of life. So as a result, endings shouldn't be subtly different, because why would a reader bother to choose their adventure or put in all of this effort to follow the adventure if their choice was really no choice at all? So if you have multiple endings, it needs to be a combination of wins, losses, and partial wins. So that way it kind of, as I said, allows that sense of unpredictability, like in life, and the musicians and artists and actors who work with you in this collaboration get to score this full range of emotions and hopefully maybe even different genres. Also consider how you might be able to increase the viral marketing or participation interaction in your story. So could you get people to take photos of themselves joining in or acting parts of the narrative out, or completing how they think maybe that story should have ended, or contributing their own memories to a particular experience or story or place. There are a bunch of different ways that you can do that, as we have done in the previous videos, but hopefully that gives you an idea of making sure that, like life, this choose your own adventure allows for that sense of autonomy, and that autonomy actually means something. You're setting up that social contract between you and the participant. So no daring people down particular pathways, making sure that you give people a really juicy choice to choose between. And as you will have noticed, what we built into Story City was the fact that there are no back buttons. Once you make your choice and move to the next location, you're committed. And we wanted to make it as realistic as possible, and that was one of the ways that we did it. So hang on for our next video, which is about the tips and tricks for outlining your first ever story if you've never done it before. See you there.